I was sitting here watching YouTube when I stumbled across a clip from the Atheist Experience where a Jehovah's Witness called in with proof that Jehovah's Witnesses have the truth. So let's dissect it and see if she's right. Let's get into it. For those of you who might not be familiar, the Atheist Experience is a live call-in show that's run by the ACA, or the Atheist Community of Austin. I've seen every single episode up to a certain point. They used to be on public access TV every Sunday, but public access has been dying out for years, so eventually they fully switched over to YouTube. I kind of dropped off when they did the switch, but I know Matt Dillahunty, one of the hosts and the current president of the ACA, and I asked if he was okay with me covering this call on my channel. He approved. So let's take a look and see what kind of proof this Jehovah's Witness has.
So, anyways, I do believe that I have proved that the Jehovah's Witnesses actually hold the correct doctrine.
Really?
And, yes. I don't know if you know much about the Jehovah's Witnesses, but...
I know that you guys are going to die if you need a blood transfusion.
I know that you guys have predicted the end of the universe a few times and been wrong every time.
Okay, let's start here. Matt and Don are correct. Blood transfusions are banned for Jehovah's Witnesses, and it's mainly based off of a verse in the Old Testament that talks about eating blood. I looked up the word in the interlinear version of the Bible. It doesn't say anything about using blood products in any way. It doesn't mention using it for medical purposes. Granted, they didn't have hypodermic needles 5,000 years ago, but they did have doctors, and naturally those doctors would deal with blood sometimes. They didn't reference blood in a medical context at all in the verses Jehovah's Witnesses talk about. The word used specifically translates to eat. You can't eat blood, and when it says eat, it specifically means consuming through your mouth and into your stomach. That's what it's talking about. And the fact that they ban it for medical purposes is even more ridiculous when you consider the fact that they're de facto demanding human sacrifices. God only ever demanded a human sacrifice 3 times in the Bible. Once with Jephthah, when he said he would sacrifice the first thing to come out of his house when he got home from war, if God helped him win it. And that thing happened to be his daughter. Once when God demanded Abraham sacrifice his son Isaac, but then he put a stop to it, so I guess it doesn't technically count. And finally, the third instance is when he had Jesus sacrificed. Every other type of sacrifice to God was animals or other various things, never people. So when Jehovah's Witnesses demand human sacrifice in the form of martyring yourself, rather than taking a blood transfusion, just remember, it isn't biblical. You aren't sacrificing yourself to God, you're sacrificing yourself to the Watchtower Society. And I just wanted to touch on what Don said about the hundreds of end times predictions Jehovah's Witnesses make. We're going to get into it more in a minute, but I did an entire video on the many end of the world predictions they've made. Their most significant predictions happened in the late 1800s, in 1913 and then 1914, in 1925 and in 1975. The 1975 one is pretty important because it was fairly recently, and they went as far as to retroactively change the content of their literature to make it seem less serious than it was. They even had a phrase, stay alive to 75. If you're on your deathbed, just make it a little longer. One more day, one more week, one more month. Stay alive to 75, and you'll never have to die. Lots of people left after that. My parents joined in the late 70s, early 80s, so they didn't see it take place, but my mom did tell me about it when I was young. She said the Watchtower Society never claimed it was coming, but some people in the religion thought so. So the members were to blame, not the society. Of course, that's completely untrue. It was all over their literature. It was in their public talks. It was everywhere. Just to give a quick explanation of why they thought 1975 was going to be the end, the reason is because they calculated it to be about 6,000 years after the world was created. And everybody knows that God works in sevens. So they believed that they were at the start of the 7,000th year. More Bible numerology. They're famous for that. And yeah, that is what we called it when I was younger, by the way. The society. Sounds pretty ominous looking back on it. Okay,
I know that you guys have predicted the end of the universe a few times and been wrong every time.
No. See, that's the thing with the 1914. People think that was actually the prediction of the end.
They weren't true Jehovah's Witnesses, right?
Right. Yeah. They were. They thought that was the end, but what it turned out to be was that 1914 was actually the start of the end.
This is the excuse they give every time. They make a prediction, it doesn't come true, and then they try to save face by explaining it away as something else. Well, we were a little bit wrong, but not completely. It did mark something in history. It just wasn't the end. God revealed more to us after it happened, so naturally, it makes sense that we didn't understand. He didn't want us to understand yet. Now we know that 1914 wasn't the end of the world, it was just the beginning of the next phase of the end of the world. They try to fit events into their narrative by saying that it makes sense that 1914 was the beginning of the end because World War I started in October 1914. We'll see this woman do that in a second. It's a common defense, but you can honestly pick just about any year and find some special event that happened that year to add credibility to your baseless claim. Let's continue.
How do you know that?
Well, because the fall of Jerusalem. The fall of Jerusalem occurred.
It didn't happen in 1914.
No, the fall of Jerusalem happened in 607 BCE.
Nope, that is completely incorrect. All of it. Let me clarify the doctrine, and then we'll poke some holes in it. This is based on Bible math that people have been calculating for centuries. The Millerite movement in the 1800s really picked this up and ran with it. There's a verse in the book of Daniel that talks about Nebuchadnezzar losing his mind and living like a cow, grazing off the land and whatnots, for 7 times. The Bible doesn't go beyond that. That's all it has to say about it. But Jehovah's Witnesses read an extra special meaning into that, claiming that God revealed some special information to them, claiming that the prophecy Daniel described about Nebuchadnezzar represents another prophecy that the Bible never mentions. So they're basically making up this whole thing on the spot and claiming God told it to them. They say that Nebuchadnezzar's fall represents the end of the world too. Remember, the Bible said Nebuchadnezzar would lose his mind for 7 times. So how long is 7 times? Well, Revelation 11 describes 3.5 times as 1,260 days. So 1,260 days times 2 is 2,520 days. Still not sure how they arrive at 1914? Give it a minute. It gets real convoluted. The next verse they use is Numbers 14:33. It says, "And your children shall wander in the wilderness for 40 years, and bear your whoredoms, until your carcasses be wasted in the wilderness. After the number of days in which you search the land, even 40 days, each day for a year, shall ye bear your iniquities, even 40 years. So there you have it, a day for a year. The Bible says it, although it's completely out of context. Doesn't matter. It's said, so Jehovah's Witnesses are going to use it. That puts them up to 2,520 years instead of days. Now they have to find a point from which to start counting. Back when they adopted this Bible math, Jehovah's Witnesses decided to start counting from the fall of Jerusalem, which they believed to be in 606, 607 BCE. Add 2,520 years to 607 BCE, accounting for the fact that there's no year 0. It just went from 1 BCE to 1 CE, and it puts you at 1914. Except that's not when Jerusalem fell. It fell in 587 BCE, not 607 BCE. We found out later by unearthing tons of cuneiform tablets. The Babylonians were impeccable record keepers. They kept so many receipts and records that some may say it was too much. We know more about that time in history than almost any other because of their record keeping. We can say without a shadow of a doubt that Jerusalem fell in 587, not 607, 20 years later. So there you go. I just debunked the entire prophecy. Let's continue listening.
If you go by the 607 and you take the 2,520 years, it exactly equals up to 1914.
If you start at 607 and add 2,520 years, you end up at 1914. That's true. Unfortunately, if you're using Jerusalem's fall as your starting point, you don't start in 607. Besides, the whole Bible math thing is ridiculous at its face. Even if the Bible actually made the prediction, point blank, that the end would start exactly 1,914 years after Jesus' birth, I still wouldn't have a legitimate reason to believe it. But that isn't what happened. The Bible doesn't even mention this math. It's completely fabricated out of the minds of the Millerites and then carried into the Jehovah's Witness religion by Charles Taze Russell.
It exactly equals up to 1914, which incidentally happened to be the year that World War I broke out.
That strikes me as a post hoc rationalization to me.
That's correct. It's a post hoc rationalization. And there you go. She's using the start of World War I as a rationalization for believing it.
Right.
Is there anything written that makes that connection before 1914?
No.
Yes.
Presumably, if it was a prediction and everybody in Jehovah's Witness land understood it, then they could have clarified it, written it out, and said, "Hey, this is going to happen at this date and this date and this date," and that would have been very easy for them to do, right?
Technically, like I said, this Bible math has existed since the 1800s. They just kept changing some of the variables every time they made a prediction and it failed. Like the starting point, for example. Originally, the prediction was for 1843. That failed, so the Millerites changed it to 1844, and that came to be known as the Great Disappointment. People sold their stuff, donated all the money to the church, and then sat around waiting for the end to come. And guess what happened? Nothing. That led to a schism in the Millerite movement. One group believed the Bible math was BS, one group believed they were onto something with the Bible math, but some of the variables needed to be tweaked, like the starting point. And the last group believed that the Bible math was all correct and something actually did happen in 1844, the beginning of the end. Charles Taze Russell, the founder of Jehovah's Witnesses, was just in the variables need to be tweaked camp. So he tweaked the variables until he landed on 1914. And when nothing happened then either, he made the same claim one of the Millerite camps made. Something did happen. The beginning of the end was here. We just couldn't see it visibly.
Right. And that's what they did. They said on 1914, that's when the beginning of the end starts. And then...
Well, I believe that they said it was going to be the end of the world.
That's right, Don. They did say it was going to be the end of the world. And when nothing happened, they tried to save face by claiming that Jesus came back. It was just invisibly, so nobody but God's chosen people knew about it.
No, actually, they're banning the Jehovah's Witnesses. They're,
Good.
we're not allowed to go door to door.
Actually, I'll retract that. It's not good. That was me being snarky. I don't want to have governments outlawing religions. I want them to go away on their own because people realize that they're ridiculous.
I appreciate you saying that, Matt. I 100% agree. I don't want to see governments outlawing religions either, especially not Russia, because there have been recent cases where the Russian government tortured Jehovah's Witnesses. They made them stand in buckets, poured cold water over them, and tased them. I don't give a shit who you are. That's not okay. It's wrong. And not only that, but it also fuels their persecution complex. It reaffirms everything they believed about the world, and about their prophecies, about how they're going to be persecuted in the end times. In fact, that's why she's bringing it up in the first place. She used it as proof that the end is here, because it says Jehovah's Witnesses will be persecuted. Banning religions isn't helpful at all. It just adds fuel to the fire. The next clip is kind of unrelated to the subject, but I wanted to include it anyways, because I feel like it's important.
This notion of, hey, you got to try everything. No, there are intellectual exercises. There's a reason we have a brain that we can use so that we don't have to try everything. So, for example, I think we should do away with routine infant circumcision. I don't think we need to have everybody try that to know whether or not it's what a God wants. Why are we mutilating children?
I 100% agree with Matt here. Circumcision is a horrific thing and should be done away with. It isn't better for you, it isn't safer, it isn't preferable in any way. It's mutilation. And it was originally started by the guy who invented cornflakes. His name was Kellogg. In fact, he was a Seventh-day Adventist. He invented cornflakes, an extremely bland cereal, to try to kill people's sex drive. He also started circumcision in the US for the same reason. Before circumcision really caught on, he tried to start a different trend. He'd have doctors stitch a silver wire on, so that if the person became interested, it would start tearing through skin. Never mind the fact that it happens naturally at night and there's nothing you can do to stop it. Never mind the fact that it happens 12 times a day on average for any reason or no reason at all. This will be incentive to prevent people from thinking bad thoughts. It's horrific and evil, and it should be done away with. There's no legitimate reason for it. Okay, I'm hopping off my soapbox now. Let's continue.
And how many religions are there? There's 30,000 variants of Christianity in the United States alone.
I don't think I tried that many.
I don't think you did.
I bet I tried a good 50 of them.
Did you try maybe learning some epistemology and philosophy to decide how best to determine what's real? Because if I'm going to try a bunch of religions, what method did you use to determine that one is better than the other one?
Well, yeah, that's the thing, too. I mean, if you're going to be on the internet researching stuff, you don't know what could be apostate lies.
And there it is. There's their defense of everything. The moment anybody challenges their ideas, they claim it's just apostate lies. They claim people like me, apostates, people opposed to the harmful practices of the Watchtower Society, are mentally diseased. They even give biblical justifications for it.
Well, you just got to look at the Bible itself, really.
Well, why would we look at the Bible? What about religions that aren't based on a Bible?
Well, those ones aren't true because Satan.
I find it so fascinating to sit here and listen to a Jehovah's Witness go in circles like this. Usually they're heavily discouraged from taking part in this kind of exercise. Don't walk into an oppositional situation. These people are literally being controlled by Satan. It's really not often you get a glimpse into the mindset like this. So I really appreciate Matt letting me cover this on my channel, and I respect the hell out of Matt and Don for what they're doing. I absolutely love this show. I think it adds so much value to the community. So again, thanks to both Matt and Don, and everybody at the ACA. You guys did a great job addressing this person's claims. Hopefully we can get to see more of this from the Atheist Experience. Anyways, I linked the original clip in the description if you guys want to give it a watch. I think it's worth it. Okay, that's all I've got for you. If you like what I do and you want to make sure I can continue to do it, you can support me in a few ways. First, you can support me on Patreon. That's probably the best way. But if you want to get something back for your support, you can check out my Teespring. I'm trying to make a shirt design for every cult I've covered. I haven't gotten every one, but I'm working on it. So check it out and see if your cult is up there. Second, you can support me by checking out my game shop. I sell controller, cartridge, and game box stands for every system from the original Nintendo and Sega Game Gear to the Xbox One and Nintendo Switch. So give that a look too. And finally, if you want to support me in some way other than monetarily, you can check out my other YouTube channels. I have a retro game channel where I answer questions like, why does Shy Guy have a mask? And why are CRT TVs the best way to play retro games? I also have the podcast where I talk about stuff I don't feel I can say on a monetized channel. And finally, I have my main channel where I talk about cults. I wish I didn't have to worry about dancing around subjects carefully in the first place, but I chose to do this as a full-time job, so unfortunately I rely on YouTube's AdSense and on the support of patrons to continue doing the work I do. Anyways, check me out in all those places if you haven't already. Thanks for listening, guys.